What if the greatest secret your government ever kept wasn't about war, weapons, or surveillance? What if it was about time itself? Now imagine you discovered how to move through the decades only to realize the people who sent you never planned to bring you back. These are 10 documented cases of time travelers who trusted their governments with the impossible and paid the ultimate price for that trust. Let's begin. Now, imagine this. You're a loyal government agent in 1983, deep inside the Soviet Union, and your superiors tell you they've achieved the impossible. They can send you backward through time. They need you to observe, to gather intelligence, and then they'll bring you home. You trust them completely. Why wouldn't you? You've dedicated your entire life to serving your country. So you agree. You step into the machine. And that's the last time anyone in your era ever sees you again. Because they never planned to bring you back. In 2019, a collection of declassified Soviet files surfaced through unofficial channels. Documents that researchers believe were smuggled out during the chaos of archival digitization. Among thousands of pages of Cold War bureaucracy, one file stood out. It detailed a program called Project Vremya, the Russian word for time, and it described a man named Dmitry Volkov. According to the documents, Volkov was a decorated KGB operative, a man who had proven his loyalty through decades of service in the most dangerous assignments imaginable. By 1983, he was considered one of the most trusted agents in the entire Soviet intelligence apparatus. And that trust, the files suggest, is exactly why they chose him. The mission parameters were precise. Volkov would be sent backward 26 years to October 1957, arriving just weeks after the launch of Sputnik. His objective was reconnaissance, observing Soviet infrastructure and scientific operations from an outside temporal perspective. The return window would open exactly 72 hours after his arrival at a designated location outside Moscow. Simple, clean, controlled. Volkov agreed without hesitation. The displacement, according to fragmentary technical notes in the file, occurred on the evening of March 14, 1983. Volkov was subjected to what the documents describe as electromagnetic temporal realignment, a process requiring massive energy output and precise calibration. When the procedure ended, Dmitry Volkov was gone. He arrived in 1957 exactly as planned. The documents confirm this through what researchers believe is Volkov's own field report, somehow transmitted or retrieved through unknown means. He described the disorientation, the nausea, the strange sensation of breathing air that felt younger somehow. But he completed his reconnaissance. He observed the facilities. He documented everything. And then he went to the extraction point. He waited there for 3 days. No window opened, no signal came, nothing. What Volkov didn't know, but what the classified files reveal with chilling clarity, is that his handlers never intended to retrieve him. The notes reference a term that appears nowhere else in Soviet documentation: temporal disposal. A handwritten annotation in the margin explains it simply. Agents who possess dangerous knowledge but cannot be eliminated through conventional means are displaced permanently. The past becomes their prison. Volkov knew too much. About what exactly, the files don't specify, but someone decided that sending him backward was cleaner than a bullet, quieter than a trial, more deniable than any conventional method of silencing a man who had become inconvenient. He lived out the rest of his life in the 1950s Soviet Union, unable to reveal who he really was, unable to warn anyone, unable to return to a future that had deliberately abandoned him. He watched history unfold knowing he had already experienced it once. He saw his younger colleagues rise through ranks he had already climbed. He existed as a ghost in his own country's past. But here's where it gets truly haunting. Researchers examining Soviet archival photographs discovered something extraordinary. A 1961 image from a state ceremony in Moscow shows a crowd of officials and dignitaries. And there, in the background, almost lost among the faces, stands a man matching Dmitry Volkov's description. He's older, visibly aged by years that shouldn't have touched him yet. His eyes are hollow, exhausted, emptied of whatever hope once filled them. And he's staring directly at the camera, as if he knows that someday, Someone might look at this photograph and understand what was done to him. The file ends with a handwritten note from an unidentified superior, a sentence that captures the cold brutality of what Project Vremya truly represented. The past is the perfect prison. No walls required. Did the Soviet Union really exile inconvenient agents to die in their own country's history? How many others were sent backward and never spoken of again? And here's the question that should disturb you most. If one government figured out how to weaponize time itself, do you really believe they were the only ones? Number 9, the erased scientist of Geneva. This case is going to unsettle you in ways the previous one didn't, because it's not just about being stranded in time. It's about being removed from time entirely. Imagine spending 15 years building a career, publishing research, making friendships, creating a life, and then one day, all of it vanishes. Not just you. Every trace that you ever existed. Your colleagues forget your name. Your apartment belongs to someone else. Your photographs show empty spaces where you once stood. That's not science fiction. According to one man who claims to remember, that's exactly what happened to Dr. Elaine Richter. In 2014, Dr. Richter was a respected physicist working at CERN, the European Organization for Nuclear Research in Geneva, Switzerland. She specialized in quantum mechanics and had spent over a decade studying the theoretical implications of particle acceleration on space-time. Her work was meticulous, her reputation impeccable, her future seemingly secured by years of published papers and international recognition. Then she wrote one paper too many. Her final publication proposed something extraordinary. She theorized that CERN's Large Hadron Collider, under specific conditions, could create what she called temporal echo chambers. These were stable loops in the fabric of time that would theoretically allow controlled displacement of matter, including human beings, between different points in history. The paper was dense, technical, filled with equations that most physicists would need weeks to fully comprehend. It was online for exactly 19 days before it was retracted without explanation. 3 weeks after the retraction, Dr. Elaine Richter ceased to exist. Not died, not disappeared, ceased to exist. Her colleagues at CERN, people who had worked beside her for years, suddenly had no memory of anyone by that name. Her office was occupied by a different researcher who claimed to have worked there for the past decade. Her apartment in Geneva was home to a tenant who produced lease agreements dating back 11 years. The university where she earned her doctorate had no record of her enrollment. Her published papers vanished from every database, every journal, every archive. It was as if she had never been born, but one person remembered. Dr. Marcus Webb, a British physicist who had collaborated with Richter on several projects, retained fragmented memories of her existence. He couldn't explain why. His best theory was that he had been traveling when the erasure occurred, somehow outside what he calls the modification radius. Whatever changed reality, it didn't reach him completely. Webb became obsessed with finding proof that Richter had existed. He searched old emails, conference registries, academic citations. Nothing. Every trace had been meticulously eliminated. But he refused to accept that his memories were false. 6 months after her disappearance, Webb received an encrypted message through a channel that should have been impossible to access. The sender identified herself as Elaine Richter. The message was brief, fragmented, as if transmitted through interference that shouldn't exist. She claimed she had been taken against her will, displaced to 1986 using a temporal technology derived from her own theoretical work. But that wasn't the worst part. The people who sent her back had done something else, something she hadn't thought possible. They had used a process she called retroactive nullification. They didn't just send her to the past, they erased her from the timeline entirely. Her final words in that message still haunt Marcus Webb. They didn't just send me back, they made sure I was never here. Webb has spent years searching for any evidence of her existence. He has one photograph, a group shot from a 2011 physics conference in Stockholm. The image shows 12 researchers standing together, smiling at the camera. But between two of them, there's a gap, an empty space where someone should be standing. And on the floor below that gap, there's a shadow shaped like a person who isn't there. Did CERN's experiments accidentally enable timeline manipulation? Or was it deliberate, a technology developed in secret and used to eliminate those who discovered too much? Can a person be edited out of history itself, erased so completely that even photographs forget their face. And if Dr. Elaine Richter is still alive somewhere in 1986, does she remember who she was? Or did they take that from her too? Absolutely chilling, and trust me, what comes next is even worse. Number 8, Operation Midnight Return. Now, picture this. You're a young American soldier in Vietnam, 1968. The jungle is on fire around you. You've been hit badly, and you know you're not going to make it. You feel the life draining out of you, the darkness closing in. And then suddenly, impossibly, you wake up somewhere else. Clean sheets, fluorescent lights, people in white coats telling you that you've been saved. But here's the thing they don't tell you. You can never go home. Your death has already been recorded. Your family has already mourned you. And instead of giving you a new life in your own time, they're about to send you somewhere you can never escape. The past. In 2016, a leaked NSA memorandum from 1978 began circulating among researchers who study classified government programs. The document references something called Operation Midnight Return, and what it describes sounds like something from a nightmare. According to the memo, during the final years of the Vietnam War, a specialized military unit operated completely outside congressional oversight. Their mission was temporal extraction. Using technology that the document never fully explains, this unit could allegedly pull mortally wounded soldiers from the battlefield at the exact moment of death, displacing them milliseconds before their final breath. The rescued soldiers would wake up in a classified medical facility, their wounds stabilized, their lives technically saved. But there was a condition. They could never return to their original timeline. Their deaths had already been documented. Their bodies, or what remained of them, had already been sent home. Their families had already received the telegram, already wept, already buried empty caskets or unrecognizable remains. These men were now paradoxes, living ghosts who officially no longer existed. And rather than reintegrating them into society, rather than giving them new identities and letting them live out their years in peace, Operation Midnight Return did something far more disturbing. They scattered these soldiers across history. Some were sent to the 1920s, others to the 1800s. A few, according to the memo, were displaced centuries backward, deposited in eras so remote that they could never possibly interfere with the timeline they'd been pulled from. The justification, buried in cold bureaucratic language, was simple: temporal contamination prevention. These men knew too much about a technology that was never supposed to exist. Letting them live in the present was too dangerous. Killing them after saving them was apparently too distasteful. So, they were filed away in history like documents in a forgotten archive. But sometimes, the archive leaks. In 2009, an estate sale in rural Oklahoma turned up a collection of old photographs and personal papers from a farmhouse that had belonged to generations of the same family. Among the items was a photograph dated 1923. It showed a group of workers outside a grain mill, ordinary men in ordinary clothes doing ordinary labor, except one of them wasn't ordinary at all. Standing at the edge of the group was a man wearing something around his neck: dog tags. Military identification tags that wouldn't look out of place in Vietnam, but had no business being in 1920s Oklahoma. When researchers enhanced the image, they could partially read the stamped information. The serial number matched military records for a soldier named Robert James Haynes, officially killed in action during the Tet Offensive in January 1968. Among the estate papers, investigators found a journal. The handwriting was shaky, the entries sporadic, the tone increasingly desperate. One passage stands out above all others. "I don't know what year it is anymore. I stopped counting after a while. I don't know if I'm alive or if I'm dead. I only know that I'm here, and they put me here, and no one is ever coming to explain why." The journal spans approximately 4 years of entries before stopping abruptly. Robert Haynes, if that's who the author truly was, simply stopped writing one day. Whether he died, gave up, or finally made peace with his impossible situation, no one knows. The journal's final entry contains a sentence that still haunts everyone who reads it. "They told me I was a hero. Then they erased my name and left me here to rot in someone else's century." How many soldiers were saved only to be abandoned? How many historical photographs contain faces that don't belong? And if the past is filled with displaced men who were never supposed to be there, what else has been changed without anyone noticing? Number 7. The Beijing Paradox. This case is unlike anything we've covered so far, because this isn't just about a man who was sent through time. This is about a man who tried to expose the truth, and his own government decided that death wasn't punishment enough. Imagine discovering that the people you work for, the people you trusted, are conducting experiments on human beings without consent. Imagine gathering the evidence, preparing to tell the world. And imagine, just as you're about to reveal everything, waking up not in a prison cell, not in a grave, but in a decade you weren't born in, holding a sign no one will understand for another 30 years. In 2003, a Chinese government researcher named Lin Xiaoming worked at a classified facility approximately 200 kilometers outside Beijing. His official role was electromagnetic field manipulation, studying how intense magnetic forces could affect matter at the subatomic level. But according to documents that surfaced years later, the facility's true purpose was far more disturbing. They were experimenting with temporal displacement, and they were using human subjects who had no idea what was being done to them. Lin discovered the truth by accident. A mislabeled file, a door left unlocked, a conversation overheard in a hallway that was supposed to be empty. What he found horrified him. Prisoners transferred from detention centers, dissidents who had vanished from official records, test subjects strapped to machines and sent backward through time with no preparation, no protection, and no intention of retrieval. He copied everything he could access: internal memos, experimental logs, photographs of subjects before and after displacement. He encrypted the files and prepared to transmit them to international journalists who had been investigating rumors of Chinese black site programs. He never got the chance. On the morning he planned to send the documents, Lin Xiaoming was declared dead. The official cause was sudden cardiac arrest. His body was cremated within 6 hours. No autopsy was performed. No family members were permitted to view the remains. By afternoon, every trace of his research access had been revoked, his apartment cleared, his name removed from facility records. But Lin Xiaoming was not dead, at least not in the way anyone understood. 3 months later, a journalist in Hong Kong received an encrypted package with no return address. Inside were photographs, old photographs, chemically dated to the early 1970s. And in one of those photographs stood Lin Xiaoming. The image showed Tiananmen Square during a Communist Party rally in 1971. Crowds of citizens waved flags and carried banners celebrating the revolution. And there, at the edge of the frame, stood a man who clearly did not belong. His clothes were wrong. His posture was rigid with terror. His face was unmistakably Lin Xiaoming, younger than he should have been, staring at the camera with eyes full of desperation. He was holding a handmade sign. The characters read simply, "I am still alive." Chemical analysis of the photograph confirmed its authenticity. The paper was manufactured in the late 1960s. The photographic compounds matched processing techniques from that era. Every test concluded the same thing. This photograph was genuinely taken in 1971. But Lin Xiaoming wasn't born until 1974. Researchers who studied the image noticed something else. Below the main text on his sign, barely visible against the weathered paper, was a second line of characters. The translation reads, "1971 is history to you. To me, it is a prison." The Chinese government has never acknowledged Lin Xiaoming's existence. No official record confirms he worked at the facility. No death certificate has ever been produced. The journalist who received the photographs was detained 3 weeks later and has not been seen since. Did the Chinese government discover a way to use time itself as a weapon? Is temporal displacement being employed as an execution method? A way to eliminate enemies without creating martyrs? Can someone be legally alive in one century and legally dead in another? And here's the question that should truly disturb you. If Lin Xiaoming was punished this way for trying to expose the truth, how many other whistleblowers have been quietly erased, not from life, but from time itself? How many of them are still out there, trapped in decades they don't recognize, holding signs that no one will read for years to come? Number 6, the duplicated diplomat. Now imagine something that should be completely impossible. You're attending your own funeral, not as a ghost, not as a spirit watching from beyond. You're physically there, alive, breathing, standing in the rain, while your family weeps over a casket that supposedly contains your body. You know you're real. You have memories, thoughts, a heartbeat. But so did the man they buried, because according to official records, you both existed at exactly the same moment, and your government has never explained how that could possibly be true. In November 1989, a British diplomat named Harold Ashworth collapsed during a dinner party at his London residence. He was rushed to St. Thomas's Hospital, where doctors worked frantically to save him. Their efforts failed. At precisely 9:47 p.m., Harold Ashworth was pronounced dead from cardiac arrest. The death certificate was signed. Hospital records documented every detail. His wife identified the body. A funeral was held 11 days later, attended by colleagues and dignitaries who had known him for decades. Harold Ashworth was dead, except he wasn't. That same evening, at a classified NATO facility in Brussels, a meeting was taking place regarding sensitive Cold War intelligence. The Berlin Wall had just fallen, and Western powers were scrambling to coordinate their response to the rapidly changing situation. Attendance at this meeting was restricted to the highest-level diplomatic personnel, and according to official NATO archives, Harold Ashworth was there. Security logs show a man matching Ashworth's description entering the Brussels facility at 9:15 p.m. Meeting transcripts contain his recorded comments, and most disturbingly, 3 separate documents from that evening bear his signature, time-stamped between 9:30 p.m. and 10:15 p.m. 30 minutes after he officially died in a London hospital, Harold Ashworth was apparently signing classified papers in Belgium. When researchers discovered this discrepancy years later, they assumed it was an administrative error. Perhaps the timestamps were wrong. Perhaps someone forged his signature. Perhaps the security footage showed a different man who resembled him. But the evidence didn't support any of those explanations. Handwriting analysts confirmed the signatures were authentic. Facial recognition software applied to the security footage matched Ashworth with 97% certainty. And the Brussels facility operated on synchronized atomic clocks that couldn't have been wrong by more than a fraction of a second. 2 Harold Ashworths existed simultaneously. One died in London. One conducted business in Brussels. Both were real. The British government responded by classifying all related documents for 70 years, citing national security concerns. Officials who were pressed for comment offered nothing but the phrase administrative error and refused to elaborate. But intelligence researchers believe they've uncovered the truth. They point to a program allegedly codenamed Parallel Track, a joint British-American initiative that supposedly trains selected operatives to exist in multiple times, dream simultaneously. The theory suggests that certain individuals could be temporally duplicated, their consciousness split across parallel versions of themselves, operating in different locations. If this theory is correct, then Harold Ashworth wasn't just a diplomat. He was a temporal operative, a man who existed in more than one place at once. And on the night of November 9th, 1989, something went catastrophically wrong. His original self, his anchor to the primary timeline, died unexpectedly. But his duplicate continued operating, unaware that the foundation of his existence had just collapsed. 3 weeks after the funeral, the Brussels version of Harold Ashworth vanished without explanation. He simply stopped appearing at meetings, stopped answering communications, stopped existing. No body was ever found. No second death was ever recorded. 6 months later, Ashworth's widow received a letter. It was postmarked from Geneva. The handwriting was unmistakably her husband's. She recognized it immediately, the same elegant script she had seen on anniversary cards and love letters for 30 years. The envelope contained a single sheet of paper with one sentence written across it. "I am not the man you buried." She never received another letter. She never learned which version of her husband she had actually been married to. And she spent the rest of her life wondering if the man she loved had truly died that night, or if he was still out there somewhere, a copy without an original, searching for a way back to a life that no longer recognized him. Number 5, Project Sandglass. This case comes directly from someone who claims to have been inside the machine. Not a traveler, not a subject, an operator. Someone who sat in a control room, watched agents vanish into the past, and eventually realized that the people she worked for never intended to bring any of them home. Imagine being the one who presses the button. Imagine watching a person dematerialize in front of you, trusting completely that you'll be there when they need to return. And imagine discovering, months later, that your superiors classified those agents as acceptable losses before they ever left. The woman calls herself Dr. Sarah Vance. That's not her real name. She's been living under an assumed identity since 2003, moving between countries, never staying anywhere longer than a few months. She claims that for 12 years, she worked for the Central Intelligence Agency in a division that officially doesn't exist. She called it Temporal Operations Research. The program's internal codename was Project Sandglass. According to Vance, Sandglass was designed to do what governments have always dreamed of doing: change history. The program identified what operatives called pivot points, moments in time where small interventions could theoretically alter the course of major geopolitical events. An assassination prevented, a document destroyed, a meeting that never happened. The ripple effects, they believed, could reshape entire decades. Each agent selected for a Sandglass mission underwent months of preparation. They studied the era they would enter. They learned the languages, the customs, the geography. And they were equipped with a device Vance called a recall beacon, a small implant that would transmit a signal when activated, alerting the present-day facility to open a return window. The system was supposed to be foolproof. Complete your mission. Activate your beacon. Come home. Vance monitored 3 such missions during her time with the program. The first agent was sent to Cuba in October 1962 during the missile crisis. The second was deployed to Austria in June 1914, weeks before the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. The third went to Japan in early December 1941, just days before the attack on Pearl Harbor. All 3 missions were successful. All 3 agents completed their objectives, and all 3 activated their recall beacons exactly as trained. Vance was in the control room when each signal came through. She watched the monitors light up. She saw the confirmation codes appear on the screen. The beacons were working. The agents were ready to return, but the return windows were never opened. She requested clarification from her superiors. She was told to stand down. When she pressed further, she was given access to a file she was never supposed to see. Inside were internal memos that predated each mission. Every one of those agents had been classified as an acceptable loss before they ever stepped into the displacement chamber. The reasoning was clinical. Retrieving agents created what the documents called temporal contamination risks. Every return window was a potential breach point, a moment when timeline integrity could be compromised. It was safer, cleaner, and more secure to simply leave the agents where they were. They completed their missions. They changed history. And their reward was permanent exile in centuries they could never escape. Vance realized she wasn't part of a research program. She was part of an execution program with better paperwork. She fled in 2003, taking what evidence she could carry. She's been running ever since, giving testimony to researchers and journalists who are willing to listen but never staying long enough to be found. In her final recorded statement, Vance describes the moment she understood what Project Sandglass truly was. She had just received the 3rd beacon signal, the one from Japan. She watched it pulse on her screen, strong and clear. And then her supervisor walked in, glanced at the monitor, and said 5 words that still haunt her. "Mark it received. Close the file." She asked what would happen to the agent. Her supervisor didn't even look at her. Quote, 1. Vance's last words in that testimony cut deeper than anything else. They told us we were saving the future. They never mentioned we'd be sacrificed to the past. How many agents are still out there, waiting? And does anyone in power even remember their names? Number 4. The Vilnius recordings. This case is going to haunt you long after you've finished listening, because it's not just about a man trapped in the past. It's about his voice reaching across 84 years, begging for help that never came. Imagine being stranded in a decade you don't recognize, surrounded by people who would think you're insane if you told them the truth. Now imagine discovering that you can still transmit signals, that your voice can travel forward through time even if your body cannot. You start broadcasting night after night, hoping someone in the future will hear you, and then imagine realizing that even if they do hear you, they're never going to come. In 2007, a Lithuanian radio hobbyist named Andrius Kavalis was scanning obsolete frequency bands, the kind that hadn't been used for active communication in decades. He was searching for Cold War-era signals, ghost transmissions, anything interesting that might have been overlooked in the electromagnetic noise. What he found instead was something that should have been impossible. A man's voice, speaking Russian, crackling through static that seemed to come from nowhere. The speaker identified himself as Dr. Yuri Bezrukov, a physicist from 1987, and he claimed he was transmitting from 1923. The first recordings were fragmentary, broken by interference that Kavolis couldn't explain. But as he refined his equipment and continued monitoring the frequency, the messages became clearer. Bezrukov described himself as a researcher who had been part of a secret Soviet program, studying what he called temporal radio waves, signals that could theoretically propagate backward or forward through time, rather than across space. During an experiment in late 1987, something went wrong. Bezrukov was exposed to an uncontrolled temporal field. When he regained consciousness, he was no longer in his laboratory. He was lying in a field outside Leningrad, but the Leningrad he knew was gone. The buildings were different. The people wore different clothes. The newspapers showed a date he couldn't accept. He had been displaced 64 years into the past. But Bezrukov discovered something remarkable. The same principles that had sent him backward also allowed him to transmit on frequencies that didn't obey normal physical limitations. His signals weren't traveling through space. They were traveling through time. He began broadcasting immediately, hoping that someone in his own era or any era would receive his messages and find a way to bring him home. The recordings span approximately 14 months by Bezrukov's own count. His early transmissions are clinical, scientific, focused on documenting his situation and describing the technical parameters of his displacement. He provides coordinates. He describes the temporal field's characteristics. He gives instructions for calibrating equipment that might be able to receive his signals. But as the months pass, his tone changes. He starts describing his isolation, the impossibility of connecting with anyone around him, the terror of watching a world that doesn't know him yet. He mentions that he's tried contacting Soviet authorities in 1923, but they dismissed him as mentally disturbed. He has no documentation, no proof, nothing but knowledge that won't be relevant for decades. Midway through the recordings, Bezrukov's paranoia intensifies. He claims he's discovered evidence that his displacement wasn't an accident. He found calculations in his own notes, handwriting that wasn't his, suggesting that someone had modified the experiment's parameters. Someone wanted him gone. Someone in his own program decided that sending him to the past was easier than dealing with whatever he knew. His final recording, dated 1924 by his own estimation, lasts only 43 seconds. His voice is rushed, frightened, barely above a whisper. He says, quote, 2, the transmission ends mid-sentence. Nothing but static follows. Kavolis analyzed the recordings exhaustively. The voice modulation patterns matched 1980s Soviet recording technology, but the equipment used to transmit them was consistent with 1920s radio capabilities. The signals themselves defied every known principle of electromagnetic propagation. 3 weeks after discovering the recordings, Kavolis received one final transmission on the same frequency. It lasted only seconds. The voice was Bezrukov's, but weaker now, almost resigned. 5 words, barely audible through the static. Don't trust them. Don't volunteer. Who found Bezrukov in 1923? What happened to him after that final transmission? And how many other voices are out there, broadcasting from decades they were never supposed to see, waiting for someone to finally listen? Number 3. The Monarch Protocol survivor. This case is different from all the others, because this time, the person who was betrayed actually came back. Imagine being locked away in a facility, told you're receiving treatment, only to discover you've become a test subject in experiments you never agreed to. Imagine being sent through time again and again, used like a laboratory instrument, until one day they send you somewhere and simply never retrieve you. Now, imagine wandering through a forest for what feels like days, finally encountering other people, and discovering that 44 years have passed since anyone last spoke your name. That's not a nightmare. According to one woman, that's exactly what happened to her. In September 2018, a group of hikers in Pennsylvania's Allegheny National Forest encountered a woman stumbling through the undergrowth. She was disoriented, dehydrated, and dressed in clothing that looked decades out of date. Her shoes were worn through. Her hair was matted and unwashed. She clutched a bundle of yellow documents against her chest, as if they were the only things keeping her alive. When emergency responders arrived, the woman could barely speak. She gave no name, only a designation. Subject 17. The documents she carried were extraordinary. A military identification badge dated 1974. Psychological evaluation forms bearing government letterhead that hadn't been used since the mid-70s. And most disturbing of all, a consent waiver for something called experimental temporal displacement research. The signature at the bottom was shaky, childlike. Beneath it, a note in different handwriting read, "Subject acquired from Ridgemont State Psychiatric Facility." Medical examination revealed anomalies that doctors couldn't explain. Her cellular structure showed signs of aging that didn't match her apparent physical condition. She appeared to be in her mid-30s, but certain biological markers suggested she should be much older, and trace compounds in her bloodstream matched chemicals that had been discontinued in the late 1970s, substances that hadn't been manufactured in over 40 years. Over the following weeks, Subject 17 began to speak about what had happened to her. She claimed she was recruited in 1974. That's the word she used, recruited. In reality, she was removed from the psychiatric facility where she had been committed as a teenager. She was told she would receive advanced treatment for her condition. Instead, she was transported to an underground facility and enrolled in something called the Monarch Protocol. The program, she said, was designed to test human tolerance for temporal displacement. Subjects were sent backward through time, sometimes hours, sometimes days, sometimes longer. Each time they returned, handlers would extract information about what they had experienced: physiological data, psychological responses, sensory details. The subjects were instruments, nothing more. She described the displacement process as agony, a sensation of being pulled apart at the molecular level, reassembled somewhere else, when else, never quite feeling whole again. She said some subjects didn't survive the process. Others came back changed, broken in ways that couldn't be repaired. Those subjects disappeared from the program. No one asked where they went. Subject 17 was displaced repeatedly over approximately 2 years. She lost count of how many times. She lost track of which era she was in. She lost parts of herself that she's never recovered. On her final displacement, she arrived in what appeared to be a forest. Dense trees, no structures, no people, no indication of where or when she was. She waited at the arrival point for extraction, just as she'd been trained. No one came. She wandered for what felt like 3 days before encountering the hikers. When they told her the year was 2018, she collapsed. The documents she carried were authenticated by multiple forensic analysts. The paper composition, the ink formulation, the printing techniques, all matched materials from the mid-1970s. The consent waiver bore the seal of a government subcontractor that had been dissolved in 1979 after congressional investigations into unethical research practices. The Monarch Protocol, according to official records, never existed. Subject 17 remains in protected custody. Her real name has never been released. She refuses to speak to government representatives of any kind. When asked why she believed the program abandoned her, she gave an answer that still echoes. Quote, "Yaman 4. How many other subjects are still out there, lost in centuries they were never meant to see? And how many of them are still waiting for someone to bring them home?" Number 2. The Antarctic Confession. This case doesn't come from leaked documents or mysterious photographs. It comes from a dying man who decided he couldn't take his secrets to the grave. Imagine spending decades helping your government conduct experiments so horrifying that you can barely live with yourself. Imagine convincing yourself it was for science, for progress, for the greater good. And imagine reaching the end of your life and realizing that the only way to find peace is to confess everything, even if the world isn't ready to hear it. That's exactly what Dr. Neil Patterson did, and what he revealed will change how you think about time, science, and the depths of human cruelty. In March 2021, a 47-minute video began circulating among researchers who study classified government programs. The footage showed an elderly man seated in what appeared to be a hospital room, clearly in the advanced stages of terminal illness. Medical equipment beeped softly in the background. His voice was weak but steady, his eyes clear despite his failing body. He identified himself as Dr. Neil Patterson, a retired geologist from Australia, and he said he was about to confess to crimes against humanity. Patterson claimed he was recruited in 1992 for what he believed was climate research at a joint Australian-American facility in Antarctica. The location was remote, accessible only by military transport, completely isolated from the outside world. He was told the research involved ice core samples, ancient atmospheric data, standard geological work. That was a lie. The facility's true purpose, Patterson explained, was studying a natural temporal anomaly located deep beneath the Antarctic ice, a rift in the fabric of space-time that had existed for millennia, stable enough to allow controlled displacement under specific conditions. Someone or something had discovered it decades earlier. By the time Patterson arrived, the program had been operational for years. But studying the rift required something no legitimate scientific program would ever sanction. It required human anchors. Patterson's voice cracked as he explained the concept. The rift was unstable, prone to fluctuations that made exploration dangerous. To stabilize it, researchers needed living human beings positioned at various points throughout prehistoric eras. These anchors, as they were called, would somehow ground the temporal field, creating safe pathways for observation and experimentation. The anchors were never volunteers. They were prisoners transferred from black sites around the world, political dissidents who had disappeared from their home countries, refugees with no documentation, no family connections, no one who would ask questions, people the world had already forgotten. Patterson helped select them. He reviewed files. He conducted interviews under the pretense of psychological evaluation. He identified candidates who were physically healthy enough to survive the displacement process and psychologically isolated enough that their absence would go unnoticed. Over 8 years, he personally processed 14 anchors. Each one was sedated, transported to the displacement chamber, and sent backward through time. Some went millions of years into the past, to eras with different atmospheric compositions, different predators, different continents. Others were placed in slightly more recent periods, mere hundreds of thousands of years ago, when early humans were just beginning to walk upright. None of them were ever retrieved. Retrieval was never part of the plan. Patterson described watching the displacement process dozens of times, the way the air would shimmer around the subject, the brief flash of light, and then nothing. An empty chamber, a human being erased from the present, deposited somewhere in deep history, alone and without hope. By 2000, the program was shut down, not because anyone developed a conscience. The rift had begun destabilizing, or becoming too dangerous for continued use. The facility was abandoned, the records were sealed. Everyone involved was transferred to other assignments and instructed never to speak of what they'd seen. Patterson kept silent for 21 years. The cancer gave him permission to finally tell the truth. His final words on the recording have haunted everyone who has heard them. I told them it was science. I told myself it was progress. But we weren't scientists. We were executioners with better excuses. Patterson died 3 days after completing his confession. The video has never been authenticated, but researchers continue to ask uncomfortable questions. What happened to those 14 anchors? Are there human remains scattered throughout the fossil record that paleontologists have simply never recognized? And how many other facilities are still operating in places the world has never seen? Number 1. The message from 2147. Everything you've heard until now has been about individuals. Single people betrayed, abandoned, erased. But this final case is different. This is about all of them. Every stranded agent, every forgotten subject, every person who was used and discarded across the centuries. Because according to a series of files that appeared simultaneously on government servers around the world in 2022, those people didn't just disappear. They survived. They found each other. And now they're coming back, not to warn us, not to save us, to hold the people who abandoned them accountable. In July 2022, cybersecurity agencies across 5 continents detected something unprecedented. Identical encrypted file packages appeared simultaneously on classified servers belonging to the United States, the United Kingdom, China, Russia, and the European Union. No breach was recorded, No intrusion was detected. The files simply materialized, as if they had always been there, waiting to be discovered. The origin point was untraceable, not hidden. Untraceable. As if the files had been uploaded from a location that didn't exist in any conventional sense. When analysts finally decrypted the contents, what they found defied explanation. The files contained documentation allegedly spanning from 2024 to 2147. Over a century of records describing something called the Temporal Exploitation Initiative, a systematic multinational program of betrayal that had been operating across every major government on Earth. According to the documents, stable time travel was achieved in 2031, and from the moment of its discovery, it was weaponized. Agents were sent on missions throughout history: intelligence operations, assassination prevention, timeline modification. Each agent was promised retrieval. Each agent was given a beacon, a device, a protocol for returning home. And in case after case, those promises were broken. The documents listed 847 names, 847 people sent into the past and deliberately abandoned. The files included mission parameters, authorization signatures, internal memos discussing acceptable losses, names of officials who signed off on betrayals, dates, locations, and the exact moments when return windows were ordered closed. But the most disturbing content was a manifesto written by an entity that called itself the Returned. According to the document, the abandoned travelers didn't simply die in the past. Many of them survived. Scattered across centuries, they eventually found ways to locate each other. They developed communication methods that transcended linear time. They built networks spanning decades, even centuries. They became something no government had anticipated: a civilization of the betrayed. The manifesto's language was precise, cold, and absolutely chilling. It read, "You sent us to die in your past. We learned to live there. Now we control moments you haven't reached yet. The betrayal ends, the accounting begins." Governments worldwide dismissed the files as an elaborate hoax, sophisticated disinformation, a cyber attack designed to destabilize trust in institutions. Official statements emphasized that time travel remained theoretical and that no such programs existed. But within 3 months of the files appearing, 4 officials whose names appeared in the documents died under mysterious circumstances. A retired NSA director suffered a fatal heart attack during a morning jog. A former British intelligence coordinator drowned in his own swimming pool despite being an experienced swimmer. A Chinese ministry official died in a single-car accident on an empty road. A Russian scientist collapsed during a routine medical examination. Each death appeared natural. Each was ruled accidental or health-related. But statistical analysts noted something deeply unsettling. The probability of 4 specific individuals from the same classified list dying within 90 days, all from unrelated causes, was astronomically low. Coincidence, officials insisted. Just coincidence. The final line of the manifesto offers a different interpretation. It reads, "You thought the past was a prison. You forgot that prisoners eventually learn the layout of the walls." Are the betrayed actually organizing across time itself? Is the Returned a real movement, a collective of abandoned travelers who have spent centuries preparing for this moment? Or is this an elaborate psychological operation designed to destabilize global powers? And if it's real, if those 847 people truly are out there, moving through history with purpose and patience, then one question remains. What happens when the people you threw away decide to throw something back? The accounting, they say, has only just begun. So, what do you believe now? That governments would never sacrifice their own people to the void of history? That the past is safe, sealed, unreachable? Or is it possible that right now, scattered across centuries, there are men and women still waiting for an extraction that was never coming? The powerful have always disposed of the inconvenient. Perhaps they simply found the perfect place to do it. Time will tell. Or maybe it already has.